The US Federal Reserve Chairman has flagged his intention to cut interest rates next month. Speaking at an annual economic conference, Jerome Powell says the time has come for policy to adjust. Mr Powell is confident inflation is within the central bank's 2% target and says it is focused on the job market. Inflation fell to 2.9% in the last month in the US, the lowest rate since early 2021. Well, joining me live is the founder and executive chairman of Fisher Investments, Ken Fisher. Thank you and great to see you. What do you make of those comments by Powell? Any surprises?
So that's what he was expected to say, more or less. But the fact is, and I've said this for a long, long time, central bankers don't really know what they will do ever. They say things, and sometimes they do what they say, and sometimes, because they're largely reactive, they change their mind really fast afterwards. In May of 2022, Jerome Powell said, and I quote, "We are not even considering 0.75% interest rate hikes." In June, they hiked 0.75%. And then in 4 of the next 5 months, 0.75%, 0.75%, 0.75. And then after that, they just kept going. And the fact of the matter is they largely react. And usually when central bankers talk, I keep my eyes open and I shut my ears. And I think that's the best advice for most people, because maybe they do what he's talking about and maybe something happens that causes them to change their mind. And you never really know. People who try to figure out what will happen to markets, for example, based on what central bankers say, is a little bit like people that are trying to guess who's going to win and lose at musical chairs when the music never really stops.
And a bit like looking at the polls and who could potentially win the US election. Well, the economy, as we know, is one of the top issues in America. And looking at foreign policy, Kamala Harris's Democratic speech at the National Convention yesterday, what did you make of that? She spoke on the ban on price gouging of food, backing unions and mortgage assistance for first-time home buyers. How do you see this policy potentially working if she is president?
So there's A and then there's B. The A part is there's not a lot of specifics in the things she said as to what she'll really do. The B part is she's going to end up with a Congress. And all that stuff that she's talking about really has to get passed through legislation with the 2 chambers of the United States Congress. And it is always much harder for presidents to get things through than the way they talk about it before they're elected. The price gouging is just, in supermarkets, is just blatantly ridiculous. The fact of the matter is there's so many different things that you can choose from in supermarkets. Nobody has to have this or that because there's so many substitutes. There's thin profit margins in almost all food items. So that notion is a ridiculous notion and it won't go anywhere. The others are some attempt during the campaign, and Donald Trump on the Republican side does similar things, trying to, if you will, buy voter constituencies. So if you recall, President Trump said, we're going to eliminate taxes on restaurant service workers, waiters and waitresses. Kamala Harris has said the same thing. Both of them are attempts to grab those voters for them. Logically, there's no particular reason why there should be a favoritism for waiters and waitresses over somebody that's a house painter, for example.
We have probably about a minute left, but I wanted to get your thoughts on what Kamala Harris said as well regarding Trump. And she said that he fights for himself and his billionaire friends. Do you agree with that comment?
Well, A, considering that I'm a billionaire, supposedly worth $11 billion, I've never particularly noticed Donald Trump fighting for me, and I'm certainly not going to expect Kamala Harris to fight for me. And they say that in that way, but then think about all of the billionaires that are Democrats and major donors. I think it's all political talk. And the fact of the matter, I will revert to what I said earlier. The fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, this is all campaign talk. And what really matters to markets and the economy is what gets done after they're elected. And that's much harder to do because whoever wins the presidency, their party's still going to have a very tight Congress. Maybe the Democrats keep the Senate, maybe they lose it, but neither side will have it by much. Neither side will have the House by much. There's maybe 10 seats in the House that might really net flip which will not give anybody, the Republicans or the Democrats, a big margin of victory there. It's going to be hard to get legislation through in 2025 to do much of any of this, regardless of whether she wins or Trump wins.
So many more questions I want to ask you, Ken Fisher, but we have to wrap it up. Great to see you, and thank you as always for your time and expertise.
Thanks for having me.